Welcome back to the deep dive, where we, try to cut through the noise and really get to the heart of what's going on in the world.
We're all about those deep cuts, you know what I mean? The stuff that really makes you think.
Exactly. And today, we've got a double whammy for you. We're talking about the recent ceasefire in Gaza and, well, the ongoing war in Ukraine.
Two pretty heavy topics.
No kidding. But hey, that's what we're here for. So let's start with Gaza. Can you give us the rundown on how this ceasefire between Israel and Hamas even came about after, weeks of fighting?
Well, it might seem like both sides just decided, okay, enough is enough, let's chill.
Right.
But there's more to it than meets the eye. There were some serious behind-the-scenes maneuvers happening.
Ooh, I love a good conspiracy.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
From what we've gathered, it seems like Israel's military, the IDF, they were facing some unexpected challenges.
Real.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a walk in the park for them. And the idea of this conflict dragging on, well, it wasn't looking too good from their perspective.
So basically, they were looking for a way out, even if it wasn't a clear victory.
You got it. It's not like one side crushed the other and called the shots. It was more like Israel realizing, hey, this is costing us more than it's worth.
Interesting. Which makes me wonder about Hamas. I mean, they seem to have come out of this thing looking, well, stronger than expected. How did that happen?
That's the question, isn't it? On one hand, they took a serious beating. On the other hand, they still managed to hold their own, even pull off those hostage releases.
Okay, but were those hostage releases really a sign of strength? Or were they more like, I don't know, a desperate move using civilians as bargaining chips?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Definitely highlights the moral gray areas of this whole conflict. But let's be real, the images of those Hamas fighters parading those hostages around, it definitely sent a message.
Yeah, you're right. It kind of made them look like they were in control.
Exactly. And that image, well, it matters, especially for what happens next in Gaza. And, the whole Israeli-Palestinian situation.
Speaking of what happens next, there's been this talk about relocating displaced Palestinians to like Egypt or Jordan. What's your take on that?
Well, let's just say it's not exactly a walk in the park. A lot of historical baggage there. And logistically, it'd be a nightmare.
Yeah, I can see that. Uprooting millions of people, sending them to countries that might not even want them.
Exactly. Plus, what happens to Gaza itself, right? Does it just become some kind of, stateless zone absorbed by someone else? Or does it stay stuck in this limbo forever caught in the middle?
So basically, even with this ceasefire, Gaza's future is a big question mark.
You got it. And the question of who actually runs the place, well, that's going to be a major headache for a long time to come.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, the Palestinian Authority seems like the obvious choice, but they're not exactly in a great position right now, are they?
Not really. Their reputation's taken a hit over the years. People aren't sure they can actually represent the Palestinians effectively anymore. Lost some credibility,
So basically, we could be looking at a power vacuum in Gaza, which, let's be honest, could lead to even more chaos and fighting.
That's the worry, right? Makes the whole situation even more fragile.
Yeah, it's definitely unsettling. And it makes me wonder about Israel's position. I mean, if they couldn't achieve their goals in this latest round of fighting, what's to stop something like this from happening again?
Well, that's the question Israeli leaders are probably losing sleep over right now.
So we've got this unresolved situation in Gaza with all its layers and uncertainty.
And then you've got this whole other mess brewing over in Europe, the war in Ukraine. That's not just about two countries. It's like shaking the foundations of everything.
Right. It's like World War III vibes, kind of.
Well, maybe not quite World War III, but it's definitely a game changer. We're talking about a clash of ideologies, a scramble for power, a whole global power shift. Haven't seen anything like this since, well, the Cold War, probably.
Okay, so help me break this down. What's really driving this conflict, in your view?
At the core of it, Russia wants to be a big player again. They don't want the West calling the shots, especially in their backyard.
I've heard people say it's all about Putin, like he's got this ego thing and wants to bring back the Soviet Union or something. What do you think?
Putin's ego might be part of it, but it's more complicated than that. We got to look at the bigger picture, right? Russia's always worried about security. They're ticked off about NATO expanding.
Okay, so NATO expansion. That seems to really get under Putin's skin. Why is he so against Ukraine joining NATO?
From Russia's point of view, NATO's like this big, scary monster at their doorstep, and it keeps getting bigger.
But isn't NATO just a defensive alliance? Wouldn't Ukraine joining just make them safer?
That's what NATO says, but Russia sees it differently. They think NATO's just itching to attack them.
So it's all about how you see it, like a total difference of opinion on what NATO's all about.
Exactly, and that's a huge problem. As long as they can't agree on that, this whole thing is going to be tough to fix.
So if Putin sees NATO as this big threat, does that mean there's no chance of a peaceful solution?
Well, he's made it pretty clear what he wants, right? No Ukraine in NATO, and he wants to keep the parts of Ukraine he's already taken.
Those are some pretty big demands. Doesn't sound like he's in the mood to compromise.
He's not messing around, that's for sure. He's willing to throw his weight around to get what he wants.
Okay, so all this talk about Russia and Ukraine, it makes me wonder, what about, the former U.S. president? He seems to have a lot to say about everything these days.
Oh, yeah. He loves the spotlight, doesn't he? Even when he's not in charge anymore. And yeah, he's definitely got opinions about both Gaza and Ukraine. People are paying attention to what he says,
What do you think he's trying to do? Is he actually trying to help make peace? Or is it more about, I don't know, staying relevant?
It's tough to say what's really going on in his head, but he keeps saying he's the guy who can make deals, fix problems nobody else can.
He always did love calling himself a master negotiator. So he thinks he can talk Putin into backing down.
Not sure exactly how he thinks he'd do it, but he's mentioned using, economic pressure.
You mean like sanctions and stuff, hitting Russia in the wallet?
Yeah, something like that. He seems to think he can make Putin sweat by threatening to hurt the Russian economy.
Wouldn't that hurt the U.S. too, though? And our allies? The global economy is already a mess because of all this.
That's what his critics are saying, yeah. They think he's oversimplifying things, not really grasping how complex the situation is.
So you've got this former president saying we should get tough with Russia, and then you've got the current administration taking a more cautious approach, sending weapons to Ukraine, working with other countries to put sanctions on Russia.
It shows you how divided America is, right? Nobody can agree on the best way to handle Russia.
And as this whole thing drags on, the stakes just get higher.
Yeah, this is way bigger than just Ukraine. It's about the whole world order, who has power, what the rules are. This is shaping the entire 21st century.
Okay, so let's talk about what might happen next. What are the most likely scenarios here?
Well, one possibility is this thing just keeps grinding on. Neither side wins, and it becomes this long, drawn-out war of attrition.
So years of fighting, potentially.
It could happen, yeah. And it would be devastating for everybody involved.
Is there any hope for a negotiated settlement, like a peace deal?
It's not impossible, but it's going to be really, really hard.
Because Putin's not budging on his demands,
Yep.
and the West wants to back Ukraine up.
Yep. It's a stalemate. Nobody wants to back down, and that's a recipe for disaster.
So we could end up with this frozen conflict, where the fighting stops, but the tension's still there, and Russia keeps the land they've taken.
That's definitely on the table. And if that happens, well, it's a win for Putin and a big loss for the U.S. and its allies.
And what about other countries? Could this embolden other leaders, like, authoritarian types, to make similar moves?
A lot of people are worried about that, especially when you look at places like Taiwan. China's been eyeing Taiwan for a while now.
So it's like a domino effect. This war in Ukraine could set off a chain reaction of instability and conflict around the world.
That's the worst case scenario, but it's something we have to consider.
This is heavy stuff. It's like we're at this crossroads and things could go either way. The future feels really uncertain.
It's a crazy time for sure. But even when things feel chaotic, it helps to try to understand what's going on, why things are happening.
I agree. Knowledge is power, right? Especially now.
Exactly. By really digging into these issues, we can make better decisions, have smarter conversations about what's going on in the world.
Well, we've covered a lot today, and I feel like we're just getting started.
We've just scratched the surface, really. There's so much more to unpack.
Well, I'm looking forward to diving deeper in our next episode.
Me too. It's wild, right? The news always makes these global things seem so separate. But when you look closer, it's all connected,
Oh, totally. And the thing that strikes me is the role of individuals. How some people use these crises to, boost themselves up.
Yeah, exactly. The former U.S. president, he's all over the place with his opinions on Gaza and Ukraine, trying to make himself out to be the big peacemaker, the guy who can solve everything.
It's weird, though, right? He's all about, I'm the deal maker, but his ideas seem so, simplistic.
With that whole relocation thing for the Palestinians, On paper, maybe it sounds okay, but it just ignores so much history, the politics, what it would actually mean for people.
It's like he's trying to run a business deal, not deal with a super complicated geopolitical mess. Like you can't just negotiate a win-win when the stakes are this high.
Yeah, it's not that simple. And it kind of shows you how things are going in global politics, like catchy slogans and easy answers winning out over actually understanding the nuance.
Substance losing to sound bites. But okay, let's put Gaza aside for a minute. What about his take on Ukraine? He's pushing this idea that Russia's about to crumble, that if we push a little harder, Putin will cave.
Right, the whole Russia's economy is failing thing sounds good, but it's not really matching up with what we're seeing. Sure, the sanctions hurt, but Russia's finding ways to deal with it.
So more of a bump in the road than a knockout punch?
Yeah.
But even if Russia is struggling, does that mean Putin's ready to negotiate?
That's the big question, isn't it? Putin doesn't think like Western leaders. He's playing the long game. He's willing to take some hits if it means getting what he wants in the end.
And what he wants seems to be making Russia powerful again,
Yes.
stopping the West from getting too close.
Exactly. He sees NATO expansion as a direct threat, and he's shown he's not afraid to use force to stop it.
Which brings us back to leverage. The former president thinks economic pressure is the answer, but I'm not so sure. Putin seems like the kind of guy who digs in his heels when you push him.
It's a tough line to walk. You want to make him rethink things, but not push him so hard that he lashes out.
Like trying to disarm a bomb. One wrong move, and boom. Speaking of which, I'm curious about this whole idea of the conflict spreading beyond Ukraine. People are talking about a bigger war, even, nuclear stuff.
Yeah, that's scary stuff, and we can't just ignore it. The stakes are already incredibly high, and one mistake, one miscalculation, could be disastrous.
We're already seeing the effects on the global economy, energy prices going nuts, supply chains messed up. A bigger war would be, unimaginable.
No doubt. It wouldn't just be those countries directly fighting. The whole world would feel it. Alliances breaking down, global cooperation gone, total chaos.
So how do we stop that from happening? Is there any way to find a diplomatic solution here?
Diplomacy is always the best option, but both sides have to be willing to talk honestly and compromise, and that's the tricky part.
Because Putin's not giving up on what he wants, and the West wants to support Ukraine's right to choose their own path. Total deadlock, nobody wants to budge.
Yep, and the longer it goes on like this, the more likely it is that things escalate, maybe even spill over into other countries. It's like a powder keg just waiting for a spark.
Everything feels so uncertain. It's like we're at this fork in the road and one path leads to, a better future and the other. Well, who knows?
Times like these, they're full of anxiety, but we need to think clearly, make smart decisions, and keep looking for peaceful solutions.
Because the alternative, a huge war, maybe even with nuclear weapons, that's just, I don't even want to think about it.
Nobody does. We have to try every way possible to talk it out, work together as a global community, and bring those tensions down.
It's a huge challenge, but the peace and stability of Europe, maybe even the whole world, depends on it. It's easy to get lost in the headlines, like each day there's something new. But when you zoom out, it's like, whoa, we're in the middle of something huge historically.
Yeah, totally. Gaza, Ukraine, it's not just random stuff happening. It's all part of this global power shift. Everything's changing, alliances, the whole world order.
It feels like the old playbook's been thrown out and nobody knows the new rules yet.
Exactly. We're so used to the U.S. being the top dog calling the shots, but that's fading.
So it's like the American era is ending and China, Russia, they're stepping up.
Right, and that's making everyone nervous. Nobody's sure what comes next.
It's like, the ground shaking beneath our feet.
Great analogy. The question is, what does the new world look like? Does power get spread out more evenly? Or do we end up with these, competing power blocks fighting for control?
And where does the U.S. fit in all this? Do we retreat or do we try to stay in charge, but, in a different way?
Big questions, right? We'll be figuring those out for years. But one thing's for sure, the old ways are gone. Things are changing big time.
Kind of exciting, kind of scary all at once.
Exactly. Lots of potential for good things, but also for things to go really wrong.
So what can we do? Regular people, how do we deal with all this?
Well, first thing, stay informed. Got to understand what's going on, the history, what the different choices mean.
That's where shows like ours come in.
For sure. The more we dig into these things, the better equipped we are to make good decisions, have real conversations about the world's problem.
You got to be critical thinkers too, right? Can't just believe everything we hear.
Oh, absolutely. So much misinformation out there. Got to question things, look for different perspectives, learn how to tell what's real and what's not.
And we can't just sit back and watch. Got to get involved.
Totally. Democracy needs people to participate. We all have a say in shaping the future.
So yeah, let's face these challenges head on. Let's stay informed, get engaged, be active citizens. Let's try to build a world that's, more just, more peaceful, all that good stuff.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Big goal, but worth shooting for.
Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive for today.
It's been a great conversation, really thought-provoking. Hope our listeners got a lot out of it.
I know I did. Thanks for sharing your insights.
Anytime. Always happy to dive deep with you.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us. Subscribe to our podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We're here to make things clear.